law changed. They did nothing to change. They're not lobbying, but they suddenly meet the criteria, and we're simply fixing that?
They arguably meet the criteria.
Right.
There is confusion right now as to whether or not they meet the criteria or not. There are a number of folks out there who continue to contend that they still, underneath the new law, do not meet the criteria.
Right.
The problem is it's created some confusion in the business community.
Right. Okay.
And we're simply trying to clean up that confusion.
Great, thank you. Representative Kidd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lindsay, in a previous life, for 38 years, I was a lobbyist, long before they had lobbyist registration. When we brought about lobbyist registration, I did have clients that wanted me to do specific things with agencies to try to procure a contract, be it for massive computers when the state started buying its first computers, for contract for somebody to build a YDC in different areas, and a whole gamut of things that didn't involve anything under the gold dome per se, but it had to do with the different various and sundry state agencies. I registered as a lobbyist for those people, although I probably didn't have to, just to make sure I was safe. And I dealt with those people as if I was dealing with you. I'm trying to become your friend and get to know you, so you trust what I'm saying and you trust what I'm trying to sell you, be it, you know, $1 billion worth of computers, or help get you on the level playing field for a YDC contract. And to me, I lobbied the department heads, be it for Sikorsky helicopters or Bell helicopters, on down the line, the same way I'd lobby the governor or somebody else. That would be just on a commission basis when I was doing that, versus the salary for lobbyists per se. How does that really different? I know you're talking about pencils for local high schools, but then you're talking about some big, big money up the line somewhere. I never got big money for any of it, but it's out there. I don't know how you can differentiate between two. I think what Mary Mark was trying to get to a degree also, I think, was how to differentiate between somebody trying to get a multi-million-dollar contract versus, you know, change a piece of legislation.
I'm still trying to figure out the differentiation that you're concerned about. We're not trying to, basically, we're not trying to regulate someone who's simply trying to sell something to the state on a contingency basis. It's that simple. And we've never had that kind of requirement before.
All right, if somebody's going to try to sell the state 2 or 3 Bell Jet Rangers, it's a pretty big contract, and they can do it on a contingency basis. Now, I know the different agencies have different rules of their own as how they handle vendors, and that might be the way to handle it, is with different agencies have their own rules for vendors, and the Ethics Commission check off on the rules those vendors have. That might be the way to do it, I don't know. But I'm saying that if you're a registered lobbyist, do you register also because you have a separate contract with that same company, or do you not register?
I would say you do, but that would be up to the regulations of the state Ethics Commission.
You see where I'm coming from? You know,
Yep.
you're wearing 2 hats.
Yeah, and some of this will have to be dealt with in terms of the regulation from the Ethics Commission.
Well, the only thing I can say, the only thing I can urge anybody and everybody to do, Mr. Chairman, and I'm at fault myself, I admit, I did not read very closely the bill we passed last year. I've read it 2 or 3 times now in the last week, and I urge everybody to go back and read it 2 or 3 times because it needs some tweaking and or some good explanation by the Ethics Commission so everybody will know what to do and not do, so nobody gets in trouble.
Yeah. And since that bill didn't pass in our committee last year, they sent it to this committee to fix it. So that's why I know that no indifference to our learned chairman of ethics. No, I appreciate it. And I do have a question, though, Representative Lindsay. Is it not true that there would be some of those purchasing and procurement requirements that are going to be set out by policy or rules of those various departments? And so there are going to be certain rules and hurdles and things through the bid process and that type of thing. Yeah. I can't imagine we're going to go spend the kind of money you're referring to without a very thorough process of doing that.
You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised.
Yep. I'm surprised down here all the time. Anything else, Representative Kidd?
I guess, finally, just to reiterate, does a person who registers a lobbyist today to appeal to people on this committee about different pieces of legislation, do they have to register if they are trying to sell something to a state agency in the future, in the summer and the fall, on the contingency fee basis? Yes or no?
Well, they can't do it on a contingency fee. A lobbyist cannot, by law, do anything on a contingency basis.
That means working with us up here. All right, in the summer and the fall, he goes and calls on an agency of the state government. Is he a lobbyist or is he a contract vendor if the contract vendor wants to give him a continuous fee basis to sell something to a state agency? Is he still a lobbyist or does he wear two hats?
Depends on the nature of the work that he's doing.
That's what's going to be confusing to the lobbyist. What do I do? Do I register twice? Register for the thing, register for both people? I can't be a lobbyist on a continuous fee basis, but now I'm trying to sell something to the state on a continuous fee basis. I'm not dealing with legislators. I'm dealing with an agency on a continuous fee basis. Am I a lobbyist or am I a salesman?
Like I said, it's going to have to be done on a case-by-case basis. It's going to be a salesman. I mean, if you're a salesman, you're not included within the law in terms of the ethics.
That's why I just want to make that to be clear. So, you know, when someone's lobbying us up here, he's a lobbyist.
Yeah.
In the summer, he's trying to sell widgets, and he's a salesman.
You're selling widgets. You're not considered a lobbyist.
Okay.
Thank you. Representative Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Oliver, I'm brand new to the legislature, as you might be aware, and this is, again, one of my very first committee meetings. But do you preface your remarks by saying that you needed sort of some clear examples? Well, from my professional experience, I spent almost 30 years as a property and casualty insurance agent in Monroe, Georgia, and my reading of this interpretation of the current ethics law, unmodified, would make it very clear to me that every property and casualty insurance agent would have to register as a lobbyist in order to deliver a bid to a city government for their workers' compensation or their fleet automobile insurance, the local school boards for their educators' legal liability programs. And historically, the insurance industry has compensated their agents on commissions. So in our industry, we got very tight, clear bid specifications from various towns and municipalities, and we were either awarded a bid for the insurance contracts or not. But at the end of the day, we were compensated by commissions paid by insurance companies licensed to do business in the state of Georgia. So that's an example right now, clear example where it's a sort of a disruption in the marketplace where people want to follow the rules but are a little bit unclear on whether or not they're stepping out illegally writing a contract for insurance after they've been requested to do so by a municipal government. Because we're going to go back down. It's my interpretation, my understanding that this law applies to all municipal governments, county governments, and even school boards. So, and I might be incorrect about that, but that's my understanding.
Thank you for your clarification. Representative Oliver.
I don't want to interrupt what I define as a bona fide commission salesperson from selling pencils to the school board or insurance agents in local municipalities, counties, and authorities. I can't remember whether authorities are covered by our ethics bill or not. Grady Hospital procuring $25 million worth of x-ray equipment. I don't know whether that's covered. I forgot. Mr. Lindsay, are you open to any amendments on this bill, or has it been filed in a way that it can't be amended?
I like the bill the way it is, but I'll be happy to hear an amendment.
I'm going to proffer.
I'm not going to shoot down the amendment before I hear it.
Yeah.
But I generally like the bill the way it is.
I'm going to proffer some suggestions just because we're in a discussion phase, Mr. Chairman, because I want to. Mr. Kidd has more articulately stated my concern than I was able to. I want to exclude cities and counties and whatever local governments under your bona fide commission, but I'm concerned about excluding vendors of big ticket items who are contractually compensated on some contingent basis. That's my concern. And secondly, I'd be happy to offer an amendment that would limit gifts to $100 also.
We're not in the ethics code.
Thank you. Any other questions of the author? Need a definition? Do we, if we're in the business of trying to understand the difference between a vendor of a $10 million piece of machinery and do we need a definition between that and a bona fide commission salesperson? I just asked that question. It concerns me a little bit.
A response?
As I stated earlier, I don't think that we do. I'm more than happy to hear any amendments that are offered, but I don't think we do. In my discussion with the various folks involved with the ethics laws, that they didn't feel like it was necessary. But I'll be happy to listen.
All right. We're going to, typically in full committee, we don't spend a lot of time with witnesses, but because of some of the things said here, I'll take a limited number of witnesses that would like to give testimony if you make it very, very brief. And I know the chamber had some, chamber, would like chamber, go ahead. Why don't you come to the microphone over here?
Very brief, Mr. Chairman.
Very brief. As one of the members of the Powell caucus over here talks about, brevity is great.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm David Rayner with the Georgia Chamber of Commerce, and as you all are probably aware, we have memberships of businesses of all sizes and across all industry, and we have heard from countless members that this is a very problematic rule of unintended consequences has come into play today. The Chamber fully supports a clear distinction between selling and lobbying, and we think that this piece of legislation gets to that point. I think what you'll hear from a number, as you can see, and what you'll hear from a number of audience members today is that the business community does speak with a unified voice on this issue, that we'd like to see some clarity in the law. I know that there's some folks here from the legal perspective that may be able to speak more articulately about kind of the background on this issue as well, so I would offer that up. But again, we appreciate the committee's favorable consideration in passing House Bill 232 today.
Thank you. Any questions of the testimony? If not, I think Councilor Chalmers, you wish to make a statement?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was asked by a couple of folks to provide a little background on how we got here and what the purpose of this legislation is and what it does. The law was amended back in 2005 to add the vendor lobbying provisions. And when it was added, there was a definition that used the word specifically. And what it says is you are a vendor lobbyist if you are hired specifically to undertake influencing the selection of a vendor. The law also very clearly indicated, however, that salespersons are not supposed to be vendor lobbyists. There's a provision in the clause in the definition which says that if you are an employee of a vendor and are participating in soliciting a bid, which basically means asking a state agency to make a sale or make an offer for your goods or services, then you are not a vendor lobbyist. That was the original intention, to bifurcate between selling and lobbying. This issue pops up in a number of different states, and most of the states that have these vendor lobbying provisions that require folks to register have carve-outs for commissioned salespersons or for bona fide salespersons and various types of selling agencies. The general principle and the theory is, again, you want folks who have been hired effectively for a government relations purpose to be doing goodwill lobbying, to be opening doors, to be required to register as lobbyists, but those who are selling goods and services are not required to be lobbyists. That has sort of gotten muddied over the past few years. The Commission itself has not gone after folks who are salespersons to allege that they're vendor lobbyists, but because of the changes that went into effect last year, specifically the geographic scope of the vendor lobbying rules was changed to include contracts from counties and municipalities, and because the contingent compensation language, which was adopted in 2005 and has since been corrected to make it effective, there's been a lot of confusion out there. I think there's also been some comments made in the press from from folks who work at the Ethics Commission suggesting that you're a vendor lobbyist if you're hired specifically to sell. I candidly disagree with that. You're a vendor lobbyist if you're hired specifically to influence the selection of a vendor. There is, in fact, a distinction between the two. And the purpose of this legislation is effectively to make sure that the intent of the original law is, in fact, adopted, and those who are commissioned salespersons are not, in fact, required to register as vendor lobbyists, and also the prohibition on contingent compensation would not apply to them. And I think that I'm in support of the law because it furthers the intent of the original law back in 2005.
Thank you, Counselor. Any questions?
What's the difference between a vendor and a bona fide commissioned salesperson?
A vendor under the law is someone...
Is it defined?
Sorry?
Is the vendor defined in the ethics statute?
Vendor is, in fact, defined in the Ethics and Government Act. It is a term that basically means the person who sells the goods or services.
And how is that different than bona fide commissioned salesperson?
Well, a bona fide commissioned, a vendor could be broader than a bona fide commissioned salesperson.
But it's inclusive therein.
I would think that it would be. a bona fide commission salesperson would be included within the vendor. The problem is that in interpreting and applying the law over the years, and given some of the comments that have been made by the Ethics Commission, it's not entirely clear that there is a fine line and distinction between vendors and lobbyists. And there, in fact, was intended to be, and it should be enforced. This will help ensure that anybody who falls within the category of a commissioned salesperson is not going to be required to register. If we take the opposite position, that commissioned salespersons are required to register, you are going to have thousands of people filing registrations with the Ethics Commission and then filing disclosure reports that all have zeros on them. That was not intended to be that was not the purpose of the law, and it's useless to require them to do that. It doesn't further the advances or the interest of disclosure at all.
Mr. Chairman, one final question. I agree with you that the insurance agent or the guy that's been working for the pencil company for 5 years is not a vendor. But I'm a little confused about what is a one-time vendor for one purpose versus a lobbyist/vendor. And I don't want to exclude the lobbyist/vendor unintentionally as we move forward.
I don't think you'd be doing that. And the questions that you were posing earlier were focused on the large contracts. I think the distinction really should not be, between the size of the contract at issue. The registration question should turn on what the person has been hired to do. If the person has been hired to sell, they were never intended to be captured by the lobbying provisions. If they were hired to engage in what is effectively government relations activities, goodwill lobbying, door opening, providing access, attempting to influence the contents of an RFP to benefit their own client, that might very well be vendor lobbying. And so I think this bill will end up helping clarify that distinction.
There's no definition of vendor lobbying.
There is, in fact, a definition of vendor lobbying. Yes, ma'am. There's a definition of lobbying, and it applies to vendors. And what it says is you are a lobbyist. There's one definition of lobbyist, and there's about 7 or 8 different subparts. There's legislative lobbying, there's lobbying to influence rules and regulations of state agencies, and then there's vendor lobbying. What it says is you are a vendor lobbyist if you were hired specifically to influence the selection of a vendor from a state agency. Now, it also, as I mentioned, has the carve-out for if you are selling. That distinction has sort of become muddied over the years because of the geographic extension of the law. Last session, it's gotten a lot of folks' attention, and it needs to be clarified. Thank you very much.
Representative Kidd, one more question.
I support what you're trying to do wholly. I really do. I'm not trying to muddy up the system. I never took a contract on a contingency fee basis because I used the language in the law that I shouldn't do it. So when I was trying to sell helicopters or whatever, I didn't, YDCs, whatever, I never took one on a contingency fee basis. I disclosed as a lobbyist the way I thought I should have. I worked the officers of the departments and glad-handed them just like I glad-handed everybody around this table. I lobbied them just like I lobbied everybody around this table. Mm-hmm. And a good vendor contractor who's going to be doing a lot is going to be doing the exact same thing. He's going to lobby whoever he has to lobby within the agency to try to get his client equal footing, if not better footing. I always told my clients I would try to get them equal footing for the contract, and it was up to their product to sell itself. I would not have tried to get them preference, just get them equal footing. That's the way I did it. Mm-hmm. But if someone registers as a lobbyist for one thing, to me it looks like he ought to be a lobbyist for everything he's doing. That's what he's bred to do. That's what he's doing. And that's different than the widget salesman who just sells widgets. And so as I mentioned, that maybe it's if you register as a lobbyist once, you're registered for a lobbyist for everything. I don't know. Well, I'm just trying to make it clear for those people out there who won't get caught in the system and they'd be burning the newspaper.
Well, we're in a situation right now where people are getting caught in the system. And I think the most important thing to focus on, this piece of legislation helps eliminate a class of those folks from getting caught in the system inadvertently.
If you think so, I'll go along with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Representative Lindsay.
Actually, I was going to Doug, why don't you go back up, if you would. Just sort of walk through what the law presently says about a lobbyist, a vendor lobbyist, and the definition of vendor lobbyist that we already have in the law.
Right.
I think that'll help folks understand that we already have the necessary definitions that they're concerned about?
Well, the law requires anyone who is hired specifically to undertake influencing the selection of a vendor to provide goods or services to a state agency to register as a vendor lobbyist. The definition of state agency was amended last year, so it now applies to political subdivisions of the state. The definition also says that this will not include the employee of a vendor who participates in soliciting a bid or preparing written materials in connection with a bid, who basically is involved in the sales activity. And by virtue of having that contrasted with the vendor, again, a vendor is the entity that sells goods or services, it became pretty clear in the law that the folks who were intended to be captured by the vendor lobbying provisions were those who were hired specifically, and the word specifically has specific meaning according to the Ethics Commission and an 08 advisory opinion. Their explicit duties have to be something beyond just selling. You have to be engaging in effectively what is government affairs type activity and attempting to do goodwill lobbying and other things as I just mentioned. The commission salesperson exemption is one that is applied in a number of different states to their own rules. Some of them have a carve-out from their contingent compensation bans. Some of them have a flat-out exemption, so the definition of lobbying does not include engaging in commission sales. The states that are involved are New York, Tennessee, Connecticut, for example, a number of them. The Georgia law, when it was adopted in 2005, intended to have that same sort of distinction, and this current bill basically clarifies that and carves out a category much in the same way other states do, that bona fide commission salespersons were not intended to be captured within the registration requirements for vendor lobbyists.
Thank you very much. I've heard nothing yet that says anybody's against this, just trying to make sure that it's done correctly. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak in opposition to this bill? Hearing not, I'll Representative Powell.
Mr. Chairman, at the proper time, I'd like to make a motion.
The time is now.
Committee substitute HB 232. I'd like to move it forward with a do pass recommendation.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Any further discussion? Having no discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, like sign? Motion passes. We'll move it on to rules. Congratulations. Thank you very much. Meeting is adjourned.